Hey everybody, welcome to the 3 Sports Podcast. I am Ben Axelrod of WKYC. He is Craig Lindell of Waiting for Next Year. A lot going on in the Cleveland sports scene. But before we get to the Browns, Craig, we typically are a Cleveland Browns podcast. That's where we originated. We'll stray. We talked some Indians a couple of weeks ago. We've talked Cavs. And let's start with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Because it might be the last time all year we talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers at this rate.
Are they going to win a game?
I think obviously football is the sport that's most cut out for sports radio, right? Because there's one game a week. You spend the first half of the week looking backward. You spend the second half looking forward. There's really easy and natural conversations to have about the NFL. Baseball, I find to be impossible to talk about on a daily basis, at least. I think that's easier to cut up into chunks.
Yeah, because the game, each individual game always feels like it's meaningless.
And it essentially is. Like, you can take out series or you could go week by week, but game by game, like, as somebody who came up as a beat writer covering Ohio State, like, when I transitioned to having to cover some Indians games up here, I had no idea, like, where to begin, because you can't make these big sweeping generalizations like you can after each and every Ohio State game.
Or every Browns game.
Yeah. Browns are a little bit easier.
Which we'll get to.
Yes, we will get to the Browns, but the Cavs,
it's almost good that we haven't talked about the Cavs yet, because now I think with, was it 4 or 5 games under their belt?
5.
5.
0-5.
It's definitely not too early to have a conversation.
Yeah. No, there is a conversation to be had about this team, that is for sure. And let's start there. I think it's the worst team in the NBA.
Right now, there's no doubt. I don't think the pieces and parts necessarily have to be the worst team in the NBA. Mm-hmm. But it's almost like they came out in LeBron chill mode with no LeBron on the team.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. I don't know how much of it is coaching, how much of it is the roster, how much of it are the rotations. So I'm just going to say yes.
Yes.
It's all of it.
I cover the team, or at least of the beats I have here at WKYC, they are like my main beat. And so I've covered them really since training camp opened. And even watching the preseason games, like, one thing I noticed at that time was just everybody's playing one role bigger than they should be playing. Like, Cedi Osman should be he can be a starter, but he shouldn't be a guy you're relying on to initiate the offense. Kevin Love is a solid number 2. He's probably definitely not a number 1 on a good NBA team anymore. Rodney Hood is probably a guy who should be a streak shooter off the bench, not your number 2 option on the offense. It's just, it's a team that nobody is really playing their role. And then when you look at the roster makeup and you have these two competing interests of wanting to stay competitive, but also developing young guys on a team that's not really that young anyways, like, it's really a weird mix.
So the one thing that I said yesterday was that not the only one, but somebody who I miss almost as much as LeBron at this point is David Griffin, because this is a Chris Grant collection of talent. Mm-hmm. I like some of the pieces better than they're playing right now, but in total, this is just a mismatched, I don't know if there is a right lineup for this collection of talent, because it's just, it's not cohesive. It doesn't make sense in a team building sense.
Yeah, it was interesting. I watched their game against the Pistons last night, and that was probably the best game they played all year without Kevin Love even.
And I'd forgotten that the Pistons had Blake Griffin.
Yeah, I find the Pistons really interesting.
I didn't really forget, but I kind of forgot.
Right. I'm sure you're not alone in that regard. Actually, his reemergence there as a top flight player has
still
been
so weird. But anyway,
yeah, it's been interesting to see. But there were like these little stretches where Colin Sexton was playing with Larry Nance Jr., where you could see, like, I don't even want to say that you could see something, but you could see stretches where this team actually was enjoyable to watch, because they weren't that for the first 4 games. But you could see these things where Larry Nance had a good game yesterday and Sexton probably had his best game. Like, you could see, okay, this might be worth watching and keeping an eye on with this team, but it's not anything that's going to win you games. And, you know, that idea of they're going to stay competitive and they're going to compete for a playoff spot, even 5 games in, like, I think it's out the door. It's just hard to see how they get out of this. you mentioned, David Griffin and just the weird collection of talent. I will say this. After they played Atlanta on Sunday, when they didn't play Kyle Korver and they didn't play J.R. Smith, I was getting ready to write about the team because I was going to go cover their game against Brooklyn on Wednesday night. And I was like, there's just nothing to write about with this team. There's just, even in the past, they had some dysfunction. They had, before LeBron even, there were interesting storylines with this team. There's nothing going on with this Cavs team right now. And then lo and behold, Joe Varden of The Athletic has the article about basically the infighting already occurring within the organization between Ty Lue wanting to play the veterans and management wanting him to play the young guys. And I do think there's a mix there, but like I think Colin Sexton should be playing more. And I think the more games they lose, that they probably should just be, the Brown season is all about Baker Mayfield, right? For all intents and purposes.
Yes.
This Cavs season should be all about seeing what you have in Colin Sexton and whether or not you need a point guard moving forward and all of that. But I also think it's tough to argue with Ty Lue if he wants to play J.R. Smith and Kyle Korver, it's tough to blame him when the alternative is only Sam Decker and Jordan Clarkson.
Yes.
It's not like they have these young guys who, what Sam Decker is, right? What Jordan Clarkson, they're not really, it's not that young of a roster.
No. But even beyond that, just from a pure, and I don't know basketball X's and O's up and down, backward and forward, but I do know that you can't win in the NBA in 2018 shooting as few threes as the Cavs do. And they've got Kyle Korver, they've got J.R. Smith, they've got Kevin Love. They almost need to revert to the LeBron. I know they don't have LeBron, but they need to revert to the LeBron offense where it's drive and kick and that's actually what Colin Sexton does best. If you play small, you post up your 2 or 3 3-point shooters and you let the pick and roll and kick, the Cavs need to do something to accentuate the 3-point shot. They can't just create 3-point shots. And most teams in the NBA can't just create 3-point shots. It has to be part of an offense. And the Cavs have an offense that's in kind of designed to create mid-range jumpers and drives. It's weird.
Yeah, it is weird. And I don't know if because I do think that is Sexton's strength, but I don't know if he's at the point yet where that's really a reliable offense for him to be running. The roster
driving and passing?
Yeah, but just in terms of him carrying that load of being the primary playmaker.
Oh, no, I don't
want
him to be primary. I'm just saying when he's in there.
Right.
And when he's not, it could be Jordan Clarkson, which...
Well, I don't know if he can pass.
I don't know if he can either, but you get my point, though.
No, I get your point, but I do think there's something to this roster might just not be equipped to that. And that leads me to, was this maybe the plan all along? And maybe this is...
I'm not giving Kobe Altman and Dan Gilbert the benefit of the doubt. If it weren't for LeBron James, Dan Gilbert might be known as the worst owner in Cleveland sports history.
In any other city, he probably would be. But in a city that's seen Stepien and Modell and
Jimmy Haslam,
Jimmy Haslam is probably number 1 on that list. Yeah, you know what? I would agree with you. It's tough to give them the benefit of that doubt, especially knowing Dan and knowing how much he wants to remain competitive in wake of LeBron leaving.
And how many times in sports do you think, maybe this was the plan all along?
Well,
and then you're like, no, I'm giving these people way too much credit.
The only reason I will say that is I thought Ty Lue's, and it's being turned into a joke on Twitter.
Ty Lue's.
His wins and not wins and losses, but wins and lessons line. That's not something a team competing for a playoff spot says.
No.
Right? And so he came out on media day and says this season's not about wins and losses. It's about wins and lessons. That's a really good line for a team that's not going to win a lot of games. I think Doug Lesmerises at Cleveland.com wrote actually a column about how the Browns should have used that packaging when they had the Sashi Brown teardown. Maybe this is supposed to be a teardown that's not a blatant teardown. And the other thing that points to that is all their money, aside from the extensions they just signed, comes off the books next summer. They only have Sexton, Love and Nance on the books past this season.
Jetty?
Jetty, I think Jetty, yeah.
Restricted.
Jetty restricted or option or something. I mean, he'll be on the team next year, but in terms of like if they wanted to go into next year with a ton, or at least in 2 years with a ton of cap space, they could do it. And that's what most of the NBA is just punting until the Warriors break up anyways. But the only other reason I would think that, and I agree, I'm not giving them that much credit, but I'm guessing you haven't been to a game yet.
No.
The energy, like there is no energy. Like it's not, you wouldn't know you're at a professional sporting event being in that arena.
Wow.
Like, and you're starting to see the ticket sale deals that they're doing and the aggregated stories about $2 tickets being available on StubHub and all of that. Like there is no energy in that building because this team, on the one hand, it has no star power. And on the other hand, like you're going from the most star power in the league in LeBron to no star. It's just such a drastic shift that in order to find like that Kyrie Irving, that guy who's going to be exciting, because I don't think that's Colin Sexton for a lot of fans, like they're going to have a top 5 pick.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Can I take you on a tangent about flash seats now?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a few tangents here.
Because I didn't renew my tickets this year. I had a half-season package, and it was really interesting to me being somebody who used flash seats because I couldn't go to every game and I couldn't use every game for business purposes. So I would sell some games on flash seats, and there were limits where you were not allowed to discount your tickets past a certain level as a seller. But then you would get these low ball offers, like an eBay auction where you weren't allowed to set a reserve.
Yeah.
And then, so these people would, if there were 1,000 tickets available, they would make offers for $17 a ticket to 12 people. And whoever accepted that offer first, they would take those tickets. And then, so as a ticket holder, even when LeBron was in the system and things were good, you were getting pennies on the dollar back for your tickets on the secondary market, all controlled by Dan Gilbert. And you were limited in what you could list them for, but then people could lowball you to death. And so now that system that they've created is going to punish every single season ticket holder far worse than they've ever been punished, because now there's no LeBron to look at.
Right. It amazes me as somebody who used to come up and buy tickets to Cavs games, somebody who has just done it, basically since 2014. Like that flash seats exists. That's the only place you can buy Cavs tickets. It's so inconvenient to have the extra app on my phone that I can't delete, because what if I want it? Like it's just mind blowing to me that I agree.
But if you're a Cavs fan this year, you should not pay more than $5 to go see a game this year.
No, and you could probably get floor seats for like twice as much as that. Tickets are not going to be tough to come by. It's sad to see. Because
5 minutes before a game, somebody has listed lower bowl seats, and their time is running out, and they can either accept your $22 a seat or get absolutely nothing. Yeah. They're probably going to take the $22.
And if you've never sat on the floor for an NBA game,
it's amazing.
And I've been lucky enough to do it. My fiance's mom gets really good tickets through her work, and I've had some good seats for some games. Like even as bad as the Cavs are, like the Thunder are coming to town next week or in 2 weeks, and the Cavs are like already trying to sell off those tickets because I think they know what's coming. But like, go watch Russell Westbrook and Paul George. Like there are awesome athletes you can go watch. And
when my kids are young enough, it doesn't matter if the Cavaliers are playing the second worst team in the NBA. Mm-hmm. Like just being that close to 6'8", 7 foot tall people for them is just incredible.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
I'm looking at the schedule here. We're not going to play the schedule game, but just realistically looking at the teams they play moving.
Yeah, because the schedule game would be looking for wins.
Well, so the two games that stand out as potential games are they play the Hawks on Tuesday at home again, and they play the Bulls on the road a week after that. If they don't win either of those games,
Ty Lue's going to be fired.
Yeah, that's how the NBA works.
You can't lose your first 10, 11, 12 games or whatever.
I'm more
and keep your job.
Though,
I don't know. Maybe you can.
It might be, and we'll talk about Hue Jackson a little bit. It might be a situation where if Dan Gilbert is just punting on the year and they just want that draft pick, that he'd rather not have to pay another head coach because he's done that very often.
Which is actually a part of the Hue Jackson story, apparently.
It very much, I'm guessing, is. But the Lakers come to town November 21st. If they don't win either of those two games I just mentioned,
I bet half the Cavaliers are going to have Thanksgiving dinner with LeBron at his house. I mean, let's be serious.
Ty Lue might.
I bet Kevin Love will be invited.
Yeah, they could be 0-15 heading into that Lakers game. It's a conversation.
How are Cavs fans going to feel when they see Instagram posts of Kevin Love and J.R. Smith and Tristan Thompson having Thanksgiving dinner with LeBron at his house after taking a big L to LeBron and the Lakers?
I'll feel better about it than I did in 2010.
Yeah, me too. But
when Verjao was hugging him before the game.
But the veil has been lifted. There's no curtain.
Everybody knows it's
stage.
a work now.
Yeah.
It's, one thing that stood out to me is the ball boys and like the assistants, they're all still wearing LeBron shoes. And that's not something you would have seen in 2010.
Cavaliers players are wearing Kyrie's.
And they were last year. J.R. Smith did all season.
Because they're awesome shoes.
They are. I mean, and they're the most affordable too of the good Nike shoes.
Oh, low blow.
No, they are.
I know.
It is what it is. They're like half the price of the LeBrons almost. I think the Cavs would be wise not to run from the LeBron thing. Because LeBron is their history.
And they have to put his jersey in the rafters?
Yeah, and they'll always be a franchise that's associated with him. So rather than run from it, and the Instagram posts will be annoying and all that, whatever. But like, whatever they can just keep from LeBron as far as Cavs culture and all that, like, they need to cling on to for desperate life. Because otherwise, this franchise has no culture. They've proven that.
I do think Lakers LeBron is pretty insufferable. Like, I know
I'm here for it.
I know, but it's like, it's goofy. It's goofy.
But he's goofy. He did silly things that we all lauded and stuff. He does seem very happy in Los Angeles.
Yeah, but not for basketball reasons.
Well, they've won the last two games. They have a trade to make. I'm sold on that.
All right, enough basketball.
Enough of the Cavs. Let's get to the Cleveland Browns, where we will disagree more, I think, than we disagree on LeBron.
Awesome.
I was fine with the Carlos Hyde trade.
I was against the timing. I think it sends a horrible message. It's very much like, what did you do at the All-Star break in baseball? What did you do at the trade deadline in baseball? Even if it's a small move that doesn't make a huge impact on your team, if you invest in your team, it sends one message. If you don't invest in your team or trade somebody off, it says something else. And to trade Carlos Hyde on a Friday after a week of practice, you saw the reaction of the Browns players on Twitter.
Yeah.
For a fifth-round pick, I don't care about Jimmy Haslam's money. I don't care that much about a fifth-round pick. If there's a corresponding move, I'll change my tune on it. But right now, it was a front office smelling itself.
My counter to that, and I agree. I mean, the timing clearly was not ideal. They were in Tampa. They were on their way to Tampa. It was clearly not ideal timing-wise. My counter to that would be, this was a Jaguars trade more than it was a Browns trade. Like, the Jaguars initiated the call. The Jaguars came to the Browns. And if the Browns didn't think that they could, if they call up and say, we're offering you a fifth-round pick, and that's more than the Browns could have ever dreamed of getting for Carlos Hyde, a guy they just signed 3 months ago or however long ago. Sometimes it's not all about you. And then, of course, afterwards, there is a, they have to spin it. Well, this was to get Nick Chubb more carries. That's not what the trade was really about. They could get Nick Chubb more carries. No. I don't think Carlos Hyde they should have been getting Nick Chubb more carries. And I don't think
they weren't mutually exclusive, and a fifth round pick wasn't enough that you had to do something like that. And
I think the fifth I'm fine with the fifth round pick. I trust John Dorsey more with a fifth round pick than that's where he got Jannard Avery. That's where he got Tyreek Hill.
I didn't say it was not valuable, but
that you could throw that into a trade down the line.
A game that the Browns lost in overtime by a field goal.
I don't think Carlos Hyde makes a difference in that game.
Hang on. The game that the Browns lose by a field goal in overtime on the road, where it casts doubt in the locker room and the Browns lose it by one play. I'm not saying it cost them. I'm not saying Carlos Hyde's carries, if he had 4 or 5 or 6 carries, cost them the game. Far from it. I'm not that crazy. I'm just saying, like, the butterfly effect, and you can't tell me that it didn't send a bad message to the locker room.
I think
Maybe they forgot it by Sunday. Maybe.
I think they have to be big boys and get over it. I don't think it's that. I don't think Carlos Hyde is that. It's not like they traded Jarvis Landry. Like, I just don't think Carlos Hyde's a significant NFL player.
I think as our friends at the A to Z podcast would say, it's majoring in the minor, and congrats. You got your 5th round pick.
I trust John Dorsey with a 5th round pick.
You can always get a 5th round pick. You
can't always get it. No, that's not true.
You can't always get a 2nd round pick.
What did they trade for Jarvis Landry? They traded a 4th round pick for Jarvis. Like, that pick is a significant pick.
But that was Jarvis Landry.
Right. So you got 1 round later for Carlos. You could go sign a Carlos Hyde off the street.
Keep Carlos Hyde. Trade your 5th round pick for somebody who's 25 and a starter. That's what I want.
But I don't think that. I disagree. I think that's backwards. I think Carlos Hyde is an insignificant NFL player. He had the 3rd most carries in the league and was like 44th in average.
Right.
Like, that's a bad running back.
No, but we'll see. We'll see because nobody runs the ball in a vacuum. It's subject to the game plan and the offensive line and all these other things. And yes, Nick Chubb averaged 4.4 yards against Tampa, but Carlos Hyde averaged 4.3 against the Jets before his average came tumbling back down to earth. So we'll see Nick Chubb play the Steelers and the Bengals. And I'm just saying, it might not have been Carlos Hyde. Carlos Hyde might have been doing just fine. I know he doesn't hit home runs the way Nick Chubb does, but I don't understand why the Browns couldn't use them both. Let Carlos Hyde have 2 drives instead of all of the drives. That's how a real grown-up NFL team works. They don't chop off a leg or a toe or anything in the middle of a season to get a draft pick for the future just to get a guy carries. You use all of them. You use them all.
But if they deem, my thing is, if Jacksonville calls them and they say, we're offering you a 5th round pick for Carlos Hyde, and they'll never have an opportunity to trade Carlos Hyde again.
That's not an offer I can't refuse.
Really?
I can refuse that.
Do you feel that much worse about the team without Carlos Hyde?
No. I just think the whole thing I think the whole thing being called genius blockbuster,
I don't think it's any. I think it's an insignificant trade, probably.
There was a lot of dismissiveness of people who were upset at the trade, and I think managing a team is more than just which assets and moving things around. It's actual people, and the team was upset when they traded them. The locker room was upset.
Yeah, but that locker room gets upset every time one of their friends gets traded. Like, this happens all the time.
Nobody gets traded on a Friday for a 5th round pick after a week of practice. It doesn't happen.
It happens in Cleveland all the time.
Oh, come on. That's my thing. And again, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but all of it together, when it was done, how it was done, for a 5th round pick, we're just so addicted to draft picks. They're important.
Yeah, but that to me is letting all the bad regimes run together. Because there were regimes that are addicted to draft picks. I don't think that John Dorsey's addicted to draft picks. I think he's actually shown more restraint in that area.
Yeah. Again, I understand unloading guys. I'll even justify trading Josh Gordon no matter what he does with Tom Brady. But Carlos Hyde wasn't a problem. He was a guy they liked. They traded him in a weird circumstance for a 5th round pick, which is nice, but I don't think it's nearly as important to do the things that they did. If your focus is on maximizing the potential of the locker room each and every week this year, they threw. I won't say they threw the game away, but the game was secondary to their future planning. And they proved that. They sent that message.
I disagree. I think we'll disagree more here, though, to our next point. I don't care about the ref stuff at all. Okay.
Don't care in what way?
It's just not a big deal to me. In the moment, it's a big deal, and I get frustrated when, like I was at the Chargers game and I was frustrated they didn't call the false start.
Well, they fired the ref.
Yeah, I know. And I tweeted at the time even, like, why even have refs? Like, if you're going to miss that call, why even have refs? And it proved out. But like everything that happened in the Raiders game, and then like it's a week-long storyline with this Baker Mayfield hit. And to me, like, it's over. It's done. And I don't think there's a conspiracy against the Browns.
No.
I think that bad calls are more hurtful to lesser teams, and so that's why they stand out more. But it's just not something I'm hung up on.
I agree with all that. And I wouldn't even say I'm overly hung up on it. I just enjoyed tweeting a couple.
Your Twitter feed would indicate otherwise.
I enjoyed a couple tweets about it, and one of the tweets that I had went super nova viral.
Yeah, you got a retweet from Byrne.
I got a Bernie
Uncle Byrne.
Kosar retweet. So I would say I was more addicted to the attention that it got than I was.
I can relate to that.
Full honesty, full disclosure. I wasn't quite as fired up as I was like, hey, I made this tweet and it went crazy, and I enjoyed pulling the video clip and slowing it down.
Yeah. Very dramatic.
And then when it went nuts, I jumped in. But I do think that I don't think we can affect any change. I think the league has a league-wide problem with referees, and I think in some ways I'm all for robots calling balls and strikes in baseball.
Yeah.
And I think the NFL probably needs 2 refs on the field, and the rest should just be like on a board called from a video screen in New York.
Yeah.
Or wherever.
I think refereeing football
Outsource the refereeing to India, like all manufacturing.
I think refereeing football would actually be really hard, just in terms of how big and fast these guys are. And like, you could call holding on every play. You could do whatever.
And that crew on Sunday was intent on making lots of calls, not screwing the Browns. I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
But you can't. The Browns have been disproportionately affected. They've been more affected than any other team this year, probably. And that's not on purpose. That's an accident, or maybe the result of being historically one of the worst teams, not getting the benefit of the doubt, which we've also seen in other sports. But
also, when you play in a lot of close games, they're so much more magnified.
But that crew on Sunday was intent on throwing lots of flags about lots of things.
I didn't see the breakdown of the penalties. I could look it up here as I ramble.
Just a lot. Period.
Was it lopsided one way or the other? Because I was at the game.
I don't believe so.
I was at the game and I was like in full fan mode and like.
No, there were a lot of calls against Tampa too, but
it felt like a lot of flags. It felt like a lot of flags against the Browns. Maybe it just hurt them more. Or maybe
there was certainly a lot of flags in the Chargers game.
Yes,
I mean that one was totally disproportionate. But again, I don't believe in the conspiracy.
Well, it would behoove the NFL for the Browns to be good.
But I also think the league needs to look at itself in terms of the frequency of calls they make on special teams plays.
Yeah.
I was watching an old school video of Eric Metcalf returning punts against the Steelers, and there was a block in there that was not a block in the back, but totally would have been called one today.
Yeah.
Because they at some point they decided they were going to call block in the back all the time.
Right.
Like, if it's not a crackback and player safety is not in doubt, they need to swallow some of these flags and let these guys play on special teams. They also need to let these guys play. I'm sorry to
go on.
In the defensive secondary, as long as it's not one of these across the middle, helmet to helmet, defenseless player hits, they need to allow more hand fighting, more pushing and shoving in the route trees. Mm-hmm. Legalize defense in the defensive secondary.
I think that runs counter to everything they've been trying to do this year.
I know, but if they really believed in player safety,
right,
they would get these guys playing closer together and jockeying for position more so that they're not loading up for that big hit across the middle. They're causing their own problems.
I'm looking here. It was 14 penalties on the Browns, 8 on the Bucks. So almost twice as many, but it also, and this will lead us to our next point, like, if I told you the Browns are the most undisciplined team in the league, that would probably sound about right. Like, right? Like, you could see a scenario where a team this young, a team with this coaching staff is just an undisciplined team.
It's true. It's true. Yes. I guess it wouldn't shock me. That probably leads straight to our Hue Jackson conversation.
Hue Jackson.
Is this where we're going to disagree too?
Probably. To steal a poll question from our friends at WKNR, Hue Jackson, stay or go?
Oh, I mean, he's eventually going to go.
Right.
It's just a matter of timing. The only debate in my mind is the timing at this point. I don't know if you're referring to my overall rant that
no, I'm not, no.
Like the idea that you would use Hue Jackson's record as a talking point for why he needs to be fired is dumb to me. Mm-hmm. There are plenty of reasons, and I wouldn't argue anybody's reasons for firing Hue Jackson objectively. But just listing his record over 3 years is silliness.
I agreed with that heading into the season. I still largely agree with that, especially not even 0-16 because like whatever happened last year was
beyond one human.
Right. Like whatever happened last year was the culmination of just a horrible plan gone awry. 2016.
Kenny Britton, free agent.
Yeah, like it was really bad. It was the result of 2 bad draft classes. You're still paying for the sins of Ray Farmer. 2016 though, Hue's first year, like we can say pretty with almost total certainty, like the plan was to go either 0-16 or 1-15.
Yes.
Like that would have been a disappointment if Hue Jackson went 3-13 because they were trying to get the number 1 pick. They were doing a full scale rebuild. Like you could see that between the guys they let walk in free agency and trading from the number 2 pick to the number 15 pick. They very clearly not only didn't care about their record, they wanted it to be bad. And so that's a whole 1-15 of Hue's record.
Including all the veterans that they just said, no, we're good. We don't need you.
Right. I mean, so you take 1-15, that should not count against him. And then you can look at 0-16 and go from there, I guess. But
and the argument of holding 1-15 against him is that like any good coach would have won 3 or 4
But they
games.
didn't want to do that.
I know they didn't. But the idea is like in some fans' minds that, you know, the margin of error between 1 and 4 wins means that he's a disaster.
I do the same thing with 0-16 where they're like, well, an average NFL coach would have won 4 games with that team. And it's like,
so that's your argument?
Yeah, it's like, so you would feel better about Hue if he was, I don't even know what the number is anymore. You would feel better about Hue if he had 5 wins instead of 2 wins.
35-1 or something.
So you'd feel better if it was, I can't do math, if it was 6, 33 and 2 probably.
We need an Excel spreadsheet to have this conversation.
You're right. The record argument is stupid.
Now him undermining his co-coaches and talking crap about his own players, his misuse of timeouts, like tangible things.
Leaving points on the board. If you want to use tangible things that happened during those seasons, I'm all for it. But to take those 2 Sashi Brown rebuild years where they actually didn't want to win and say, well, any coach who's 3, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Like that's, if that's your conclusion, fine, but you need to give me more than that because that's just like shorthand too easy. And unfortunately for Hue Jackson, there is more than that because the one thing, even last year, because last year was just an ugly season, just in terms of everything that happened, the infighting in the fan base, that's when like it really ramped up and all of that, just an ugly season. The one thing, and because I was so anti-Sashi Brown, I wasn't pro Hue Jackson necessarily because it's hard to be pro Hue Jackson, but I extended him a longer leash. I thought that he deserved every benefit of the doubt. The one thing even last year that I was willing to say is I don't know how good of a football coach he is. I know how he's a bad CEO. He's just bad at the CEO part of this job. And that now, from everything we've seen this year, and I hate to even use this to throw what we saw on Hard Knocks into it, he's a bad CEO, and a lot of the stuff other than his record that people want to throw at him, it's starting to stick.
So
it's beyond starting to stick.
I've used the word deserve in terms of the benefit of the doubt too, and I think that's probably a little bit strong. Mm-hmm. I think Hue Jackson needed to come back this year so that Jimmy Haslam could prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he wasn't the same guy who fired Chud after 1 year. He wasn't the same guy who fired Lombardi and Banner and Farmer and all these different people and caused Kyle Shanahan to PowerPoint his way out of Cleveland. He needed to bring Hue Jackson back for that reason. And I was willing to see what Hue Jackson looked like as a head coach with an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator and a new special teams, all the pieces in place of what a typical organization should have, including a general manager with a track record and a front office that was deep and knowledgeable and experienced. And I think as we've seen unfold at the beginning of the season, and I believe we're going to see unfold in the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, Hue Jackson is not a guy that should keep you from looking for his replacement.
Right.
And so the Browns will do that, and I hope John Dorsey has a lot to do with it. I'm still not like, fire Hue, fire him now. I think if you want to have an interim coach for the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season because it speeds up your ability to hire those hot candidates, fine. But you might as well keep him in place for most of the season.
Yeah, that's a good point about having to bring him back, because you know what the reaction would have been across the league had they fired him after those 2 Sashi Brown years was, you brought in a head coach to lose games and he lost games and then you fired. Like, it would have been a disaster. And then you're in a place where instead of talking to the A and B list candidates, you're stuck talking to Mike Pettin.
Pat Shurmur.
Yeah, Pat Shurmur and Mike Pettin. Like, it's just not a good place to be as an organization. Like, if they fire Hue Jackson, whether they do it on Monday or whether they wait till the end of the season or anywhere in between, whoever they're targeting out on the coaching market isn't going to be like, well, why did you fire Hue Jackson? Like, they're going to understand why Hue Jackson lost his job. So I don't, that's a good point. As far as the timing of it,
and it's also important to remember that the Browns, it's easy to forget, but the Browns were lucky to get Hue Jackson to be their head coach. The Browns were lucky to have somebody with experience who was qualified for other head coaching gigs in the NFL to take their job.
That's one of the biggest reasons why, like, I think Jimmy Haslam has been so loyal, Jimmy and D have been so loyal to him, is because, like, they viewed that as their the big feather in their cap, in terms of their Browns ownership. As far as the timing, I think it's in play after every consecutive loss from here on out. Like, I really, if they,
I think you're right, but it makes me laugh.
Yeah, I think if they lose Sunday against the Steelers, like, it's very possible they fire him Monday.
A game that they're favored, or not favored, they're
8-point underdog.
8.5?
8.5 point.
8.5 point underdogs.
Yeah.
It's like,
right.
What'd you expect?
But so they have Pittsburgh, they have the Chiefs next week, they have the Falcons, and they have their bye. Like, if they don't win one of these 3 games, it's obviously very much in play at the bye. I would prefer...
If he loses the locker room, it's a lock.
And you're starting to see cracks as far as that and everything with Todd Haley. That's the one reason why...
Let's talk about the more interesting scenario.
Yes.
Let's say he wins 2 out of 3.
Then they have to keep him till the end of the year, probably.
But then are they going to be accused of David Blatting him? Like, he won enough games and he deserves to come back another year, even though, like, that's where I think that's it's unlikely, but that's the more interesting scenario, because we've seen that over the years, whether it was David Griffin getting in trouble, quote unquote, in trouble for firing a winning coach in David Blatt.
First place coach, I think.
First place coach. There was a lot of criticism from Greg Popovich and all around the league when he did that. And then we have 2 other examples where teams didn't make a move on a coach because of their winning record, when the Indians should have fired Eric Wedge. The Cavaliers should have fired Mike Brown and found somebody better. But because Eric Wedge, that team was so talented and won in spite of Eric Wedge, they couldn't fire him. He was manager of the year. They should have fired him after he won manager of the year. Same with Mike Brown. Mike Brown won in spite of himself because he had LeBron James. The Cavs could have done better. They didn't make a move. So the more interesting scenario to me is if Hue Jackson wins 7 games miraculously.
I think
they still have to fire him.
I think anything less than 500 is he's probably fired. I
don't think there's a number. I think if he wins 9, they have to get rid of him.
I think it's going to be a Rams situation. I mean, if he wins 9 from here, like, it's going to be like, what the hell happened?
I know.
I think it's the scenario I keep coming back is to the Rams with Jeff Fisher, where I don't know what his record was the last year, but I don't think it was disastrously bad. Like, it was probably 6-10 or 7-9. You just know this team to get back.
Wait a minute. You're telling me Jeff Fisher went 7-9, 6-10?
They're going to have to make a coaching change to get better next year. They're just going to have to. And the only reason why I think it's pretty much in play from here on out is, like we said earlier, to bring this full circle, this season's all about Baker Mayfield. And whatever Hue Jackson is doing with these post-game comments and Todd Haley and all that, you cannot let it damage Baker Mayfield in any way. You just can't let it.
No, and if you were designing a coaching staff to make the most out of Baker Mayfield, it wouldn't look like Hue Jackson.
No,
I don't think.
And that was probably something that everybody saw come draft time too. You're right though. I mean, Hue's on record of saying he prefers what 6'2", 6'2". So,
and I do think Hue Jackson can really help a team with their quarterback, just not as the head coach. I think he's got to.
Well, he's shown that.
I think he's got to be the third or fourth coach in the mix.
He's they made this point on Adam Carolla, and this was like a month ago. I forget who it was. I think it was Dave Damashek who was talking to him. Who was saying Hue Jackson's one of those guys who he had the one good year with Andy Dalton, and everybody just latches on. Well, that's the guy who fixed Andy Dalton. And I think the more we're seeing of Hue Jackson, the more that's coming true.
They give him some Flacco credit too.
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm with you.
Sunday, they play the Steelers.
It's kind of fun not to have that much controversy around the opinion. Like, we're debating the timing.
Right.
But we all kind of realize that Hue Jackson puts a ceiling on this team.
I woke up early in Tampa on Monday, and I listened to Lima and Carmen, and then I listened to Riz and Hammer, and they basically both had the same conversation. And it's this weird thing where they weren't necessarily having the they need to fire Hue conversation.
He wasn't even necessarily to blame for them losing the game.
No, I mean, you could point to leaving those points on the board, but it's just the aggregate of bad decisions and CEO stuff. But it's just like, it's this weird thing of we all know it's going to happen, so when's it going to happen?
Yeah.
And
you could say that about any coach in any sport for any team, by the way. Because almost every coach, other than Belichick, gets fired. Belichick will get to retire.
So we were talking about Ty Lue earlier, right? Like, whenever the Cavs make the playoffs next, Ty Lue's not going to be their head coach. Like, it's just, that's how the NBA works.
Wow.
Right?
I would love to make that bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. He won't be. I never thought about that.
Right? Like, it's just, Ty Lue's not going to be here for the next great era of Cavs basketball.
When we talk about sports, so often we're thinking about, like, the next 5 games, the next season. Like, we don't think that long range, but that Ty Lue comment is...
right?
That's a mind bender.
Yeah. They play Pittsburgh on Sunday. This is probably the least amount of confidence I've gone into a game with this season.
They're going to need Ben Roethlisberger to give them the game.
And that typically doesn't happen in Pittsburgh.
Not at this point in the season.
As different as this season has been because of pretty much Baker and maybe Denzel Ward and Nick Chubb to a degree, and just more talent. They have more talent on the roster. Like, this season has been different. Regardless of the record, it feels like we've seen this game that's coming on Sunday 100 times since 1999.
Yeah.
Like, that 8-point spread seems small.
Yes. And the Browns team that scored 2 points in the first half against Tampa, is going to be lucky to get a couple of field goals, because field goals are even tough to come by at Heinz Field.
Yeah.
So
I don't have high hopes, and if it's an ugly loss...
Makes me want to bet the first half line. What's the first half line?
I can look it up here for you.
Gambling's almost legal everywhere except Ohio.
Yeah, Ohio's lagging behind. We could have an emergency podcast maybe next week.
It's possible. It's possible. The history of... And maybe Jimmy Haslam will want to defy that history too, the history of firing coaches after Pittsburgh games.
Yeah. Well, I pointed that out on Twitter, the last 5 fired after Pittsburgh. It was all at the end of the season.
Yeah.
But, because I knew the last couple had been...
Judd wasn't.
That was Pittsburgh.
It was Pittsburgh, but it wasn't the last... Was it the last...
It was the last week
game.
of the season.
You're right. Okay. It was before they were supposed to have their off-season meetings. Yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
I knew it was Chud and at least Pettin, and I thought Shermer. I didn't realize Mangini too.
Chud was probably the moment where I was the most mad online.
I was driving to Miami for the Orange Bowl, and I think I was, it was just, because that was one, nothing came out until that Sunday morning.
Mangini you could justify, because old regime, new regime, we get it.
And he was 5-11 for 2 straight years. Like, that gets you fired in the NFL. Unless you're Hue Jackson. That is going to do it for this week's 3 Sports Podcast. He is Craig Lindell of Waiting for Next Year. I am Ben Axelrod of WKYC. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe on iTunes, leave a rating, leave a review, tell a friend. We'll be back with you next week, breaking down all the latest in Cleveland sports.